Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on Facebook Live for Karuna's annual Memorial Day event. Today is a chance to take some time to reflect upon and remember the family and friends we have lost recently. My name is Tracy Porst, and I'm proud to be the Chief Executive Officer of Karuna Hospice Services. I'm joined today by members of Karuna's Spiritual Care and Grief and Bereavement teams and our special guest, Robin Bailey. This morning is about sharing what we know and that we hope our collective philosophy, wisdom and experience can offer you some comfort. Dealing with grief is challenging in all sorts of ways and is not something that can be hurried through. But remember, you are not alone. And through it all, remember to keep the memory of your loved one alive within you. Model their values in your own life and share your memories for the benefit of those who did not have the privilege of meeting them. Now I'd like to introduce to you Venerable Children, Karuna's Spiritual Care Coordinator, who will share a few words of wisdom with you.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you to remember and honour all of the loved ones who have gone before us. At Karuna, we have the privilege of accompanying many families, including your family, in the care of a loved one as they approach the end of life. We're aware of the incredible journey you go through in caring for your loved one at home, as well as the powerful journey of grief you experience. Our nurses, volunteers, and those of us who offer counselling and spiritual care, as well as everyone who works behind the scenes at Karuna, hold you in our hearts. Our staff do regular meditations at Karuna where we send loving kindness and compassion to you and all the families we've been connected with. We think of you often. You really are in our hearts. You've changed our lives by allowing us into your home during the precious last weeks and days of the life of your loved one. And we're honoured to be able to offer whatever we can in supporting you through this. In the Buddhist tradition, there's a teaching about the changing nature of life, that everything is changing from moment to moment. It's called the nature of impermanence. Although we may want things to stay the same, for things to be permanent, we can't control the change that keeps happening. This includes our relationships, our health, our life, and our death. We're faced with the impermanent nature of life every day through all the many changes that happen, including the profound change at the time of death. There's a reading from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying I'd like to share now about this. Life is nothing but a continuing dance of birth and death, a dance of change. Every time I hear the rush of a mountain stream or the waves crashing on the shore or my own heartbeat, I hear the sound of impermanence. These changes, these small deaths, are our living links with death. They are death's pulse, death's heartbeat, prompting us to let go of all the things we cling to. As we search for meaning in death, we often find inner wisdom, compassion, and understanding. A close encounter with death can bring a real awakening, a transformation in our whole approach to life. It can bring a reduced fear and a deeper acceptance of death, an increased concern for others, and a wish to help them. We gain a clearer perspective about life, what's important and meaningful, and through this, a greater sense of the value of living each day well. Although everyone couldn't be here in person today, on behalf of all of the nurses, all of our volunteers, our counsellors, and everyone at Karuna, we share this moment of remembering and honouring your loved ones today. May you have peace in your heart.
Thank you, children. So what can we learn from grief? I'd like to welcome Robin Bailey to share her insights with you.
Thank you. Yes, good morning. My name is Robin Bailey and I'm a breakfast and radio announcer in Brisbane. I'll just put my glasses away in case I need them later. A breakfast radio announcer for the FM station 97.3. Now, I first became aware of Karuna when my husband Sean was in the Wesley Hospital after a terminal diagnosis from liver cancer. The palliative care team recommended Karuna as a support, as Sean very much wanted to die at home. This is still very new for me. It happened peacefully and full of love on the 26th of September last year. So yes, we've only just acknowledged 12 months without him in our physical lives. But for me, sadly, Sean's death was not the only contact that I had with death over the last few years. 6 years ago, the father of my 3 sons and then husband of 15 years, Tony Smart, decided to take his own life. Obviously, these 2 deaths have been very different, but the fallout has been exactly the same. Devastation, isolation, profound grief and pain for both my 3 teenage boys and myself. It's interesting when it comes to grief in the Western world. Unlike a lot of Indigenous cultures, we do not have many rituals that can help us cope with all that we have to face when someone dies. I remember someone suggesting to me, trying to be helpful, to look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of the 5 stages of grief as a way of trying to deal with it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, but if you don't, let me remind you that they say, and it's not in any particular order, and sometimes it can happen all at once, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, I'm not sure about you, but with my grief, it has been all of those and some with no rhyme or reason and no order or date or end date. In fact, on any given day, I can go through all of them, sometime careering from one to the next. I have to say my poor family has seen me reach out to them, and then when they do, they get me with frustration and anxiety. I have to be honest, I've yet to experience acceptance with Sean. I know that it's possible because I got there with Tony, but it's not there yet. But there are 2 words that I would like to add to this based on my experience, and that is vulnerability and resilience. From the moment someone dies, everything changes, right? We all get that. The anchor that held us to that person to the world and the way that you experience that person is severed. And no matter how peaceful and love-filled their death was, from that moment, you are on your own. I remember the hours and days after Sean's death. I couldn't quite work out what I was supposed to be because my whole life from that past year had been defined by Sean's cancer journey. And everything else had become less important than being his wife, his carer, his advocate, and his confidant. In your adult life, can you think of a time when you have been that vulnerable ever? Whatever your filter on the world to be completely rebuilt, that's what you've got to do. And this isn't exclusive to the death of a partner, it is the same with the death of a parent or a sibling or a child. That role that we have established, that was being nurtured and created over years based on the way you saw yourself because that person existed in your life, is gone. I've never felt so vulnerable, and I quickly realised that people do not know what to do with that vulnerability. I've got my big man hanky, forgive me. I think we have a grace period of about a month, directly after the time your loved one dies, when the world treats you with kid gloves. You're kind of allowed to do whatever you want to, and it's accepted. So you can not get out of bed for days, and those around you facilitate your life so that you don't have to. Wonderful, caring friends and family, can I now do my page, would do things that meant that I didn't have to re-enter the world. So I got lots of meals dropped off so my kids would actually eat, which was a bonus, and they didn't have to cook, which was also a bonus. And I didn't have to worry about things. People mowed my lawn, they walked my dog, they brought bottles of wine so that I could try and cry with them about everything I'd lost. I was allowed to be hysterical and quiet. I could cry buckets or get busy, and I was so grateful that I could just breathe in and out, and no one expected any different. The problem was that everyone else's life started to move on, and I didn't know how I was even going to begin to bring a life without Sean in mine. I think that happened about the 3 or 4 week mark, and then I just felt exposed. It wasn't that people thought I should get over it, but they just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it anymore. So if I was asked, "Are you okay?" and the answer was no, then there was this awkward silence and people didn't know what to say. I suddenly became too much for everybody. I was too emotional, too sad, too angry, too silent, too intense, too unpredictable, too cryy, too pissed off, or just too much. I wanted to explain to the world that I wasn't trying to make them feel uncomfortable, but I didn't know who I was. And until I had the time to work that out, I just had to let these feelings come out, like I clearly am now. And I was just feeling. I think my experience was magnified by the fact that I do a 3.5-hour breakfast radio show live every day. And I quickly realised that if I needed to find a place for my grief that was not being thrown in the faces of our listeners. I mean, I get it. Who wants to wake up every morning to some sobbing lunatic rocking in the corner wanting her dead husband? It's not fun or entertaining, and I wouldn't listen to it either. So I realised that I had to find a way to sort it out. But it was I learned to mask my pain with humour. I learned to literally place my grief in a box marked later and pushed it to one side. That is not to say I wasn't hurting, and I still have to be really honest. I feel kind of disloyal to Sean that I can get up because I don't feel like I want to. Okay, this sounds like I'm being super critical of every other person who's come into my world, and I definitely am not. As kids, we are not given tools to deal with profound grief. No one tells you how to react when someone is clearly in so much pain. So unless you've experienced it yourself, how can you possibly know what the right thing to say is? For me, I just stopped answering the question, "Are you okay?" Honestly. I would just say, "I'm fine," and move on. I know a friend who lost one of her twins in utero, and when people asked how it was going, she played along that the babies were fine and everything was great because she didn't want the awkward alternative. It was only afterwards that she would then text that person if they were close to her and explain the truth. It sounds so harsh, but it also meant she didn't have to keep retelling her story, which is also a tough thing to do. Again, I ask you, has there ever been a more time when you've been more truly vulnerable? So, what is the positive out of all of this? Because I look for it every day. Well, for me, that is vulnerability. That vulnerability gave birth to some pretty kick-ass resilience. I think in grief, we all have some clear choices. I think we can use the pain to become stronger, or we can succumb to it. Don't get me wrong. There was a days, and I remember this very clearly, very early on after Tony died. He had been our breadwinner. I was the breadwinner in the family. He did all our finances, and it became quite clear that there was a big debt that I was going to have to repay. That, coupled with being a radio announcer, trying to parent 3 teenage boys who were 9, 12 and 14 and in immense grief. I just literally got on the floor one day and cried and cried and cried, and no one came. And in that moment, I realised that no one was going to come. And the only thing I could do was pick myself up and get moving. And in that moment, resilience was born. People often say to me, "How have you coped? How have you survived not only suiciding, but finding love again, only to have it snatched away by cancer?" And I say this, I've survived by being true to myself, by accepting at times I'm too much for this world and that they don't cope, and that my grief looks ugly and sometimes uncomfortable for others to digest. But damn it, I can get up every morning and face the world without Sean by my side, and that resilience has been born purely out of my vulnerability and grief. It's kind of funny though, because as I've just passed Sean's first anniversary, I actually think it's not me that needs to change. It's actually how the Western world deals with grief. One of the reasons I'm so grateful for Karuna is that they not only helped Sean die at peace with dignity at home, but they gave us rituals around his death that made it okay for all of us to be united in our grief. the red twine that was placed around our wrists by Chandra during the prayers for the dying ceremony, just 2 days before Sean died, was a lovely, constant reminder for all of us after his death that we all bore witness to his final moments. And the fact that those twines wore off and were placed on nearby trees, we could talk to each other about that time. As a culture, we need a heck of a lot more of that. Maybe the Italian nonnas of my childhood who wore black for a year in mourning were right. It was a sign that they were vulnerable, that they needed respect and support, and the rest of the world needed to honour that. Maybe we need to start having conversations with our kids about how to relate to someone who's going through grief, loss, or pain. And I guess I also think as a media person, I have that responsibility, like I am now, to stand up, show it who it is, how it is for me, and for that to be okay. Because if I do it, then maybe people won't be as freaked out by it when they see it in others. And also, like on Are You OK Day this year, they offered suggested answers to someone when they said no, they weren't okay. And maybe we need to look at that as well. I do not know what my future looks like. I am still working in breakfast radio, still living with 3 fast-growing, lots of food-consuming young men, and still crying every day for my beautiful husband. But unlike a lot of other people in this world right now, I know I will be okay. In a time of a global pandemic, that is saying something. So how do I know that my world will somehow work out? Because nothing will ever be and make me feel as vulnerable as losing the love of my life. And the fact that I'm still here, standing upright in front of you all, means that I've also found, and it's proof that I have resilience. And I hope for everyone listening and seeing this now, that you too can feel the power in yourselves. Take care.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for sharing your experience. Appreciate that. And remember, you're not alone, and all of you, Karuna is here with kindness, compassion, and courage for all of you, and please always remember that. Now let's remember our loved ones, and I'd like to invite Sandy Hutchinson and Venerable Sultram from Karuna's Grief and Bereavement team to read out the names of your family and friends.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we start this morning with Desmond Andrew, affectionately called Des Green. Glenn Allen Hickman. Gaynor Helen Solomon. Rosa Esposito. Barbara McCulloch. Therese Stewart. Walter Lindemann. Francis Frank Murphy. Matthew Barantz. Kitty Barentz. Beverly Hollandale. Kerry Ann Simpson. Douglas Doug Watson. Jim Jamison. William Bill Riley and Anne-Marie Annie Riley Smith. Jennifer Worthington. Sally Phillips. Merle Shepherd. Kristen Larson. Maximilian Bowman.
Robert Bob James Edwards. Tony Smart. Sean Pickwell. Merlin Minchin. Charles Minchin. David Ferris and Gopama. David Karkik. Matthew Cantrell, Tiani Tang, Geraldine Cave, Kerry Michael Fagan, Christine Elaine McGlone, Jeff Latimer, Therese Meggett, Marjorie Leach, Yvonne Dijon, Lindsay Klassen, Dr. John Roberts, Helen Mary Franklin, Brian Sheldrick, Cassandra May Tills, Frank Morris, Blair Meldrum, Malcolm Meldrum, Ruth Mitchell, and Verna Sanders. Thank you to everyone who sent in names to us for today. We'll take a moment to reflect and remember these loved ones and all of our loved ones.
Thank you, Sandy and Saltram. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, friends far and wide. In closing, I'd now like to invite Venerable Children to offer a closing prayer for our ceremony today. Thank you.
There's a Buddhist prayer that the Dalai Lama reads or recites every day. It's one of his favourite prayers, and I thought it would be a good one to finish with today, dedicated for all of our loved ones. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of our merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with the mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you, everyone.